With what we can do with Serum. So basically, this is the initialized sound, and it is just a single sawtooth wave. So if I hit the pencil button here, it brings up a new window that allows me to reshape the waveform in whatever way I might want. So I'm going to go here, and I can simply just go ahead and physically draw changes into the wave shape however I want. It has a toolkit on the side here that allows me to choose from different draw selectors. So for this one, we might want it like that. Okay, so then once we've done this, we have a completely different wave shape. Now what I'm going to do is copy this one to a new location here. And on this one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to alter it in a different way. So basically what we're doing here is we are along the path to creating our very own wavetable from scratch. Now, would I recommend doing this type of thing? Depends how much time you've got on your hands and how much time you really want to spend with this, doing this. So not bad, kind of like a combination saw square down to a square. So this is just one of the myriad of things that we can do from this advanced wavetable view. And this is really kind of like the dream programming kind of page. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and I'm going to choose one of the complex waveforms from, you know what, let's go, now we can go and choose one of Massive's waveforms. And where is it? Massive is right here. Let's go to everybody's favorite Modern Talking, okay? And let's drop the octave range by 1 or 2. Right? This is what you've heard to death over and over again in a million dubstep tunes. So if we go in here, one of the things that we can do is you'll see that basically it shows us the, and this is not showing the full number of frames because this table is the wrong one. I'm going to do one thing here. Inside global, I have a control that basically allows me to control the wavetable position with the mod wheel on my keyboard when that editor is open. So I'm going to go ahead and click here to save it and go back in here, and this should work now. So there's a variety of different things that I can do to these wavetables when they're in this particular state. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change the sorting here with this. And instead of having it go in what they've dictated, I'm going to say sort by spectrum, highest spectral amount. And I think that I'm actually going to choose a different wavetable for this, simply something that has more frames on it. And this was the wrong one. I believe that this is the one that has all of them in it. Yep, that's the one. Sorry about that. Okay, so this has 24 different tables in it. And this is the one that wasn't done right. But it's right for what we want to do here. One of the things that we hear that's not right about it is that it's not doing smooth changes from one wave frame to another. It's very jumpy and jerky. So one of the things that we can do is we can go ahead here and process and say, fade the edges to the grid size for each of those frames so that it's going to move smoothly between them. It's not as smooth as I would like it. We can go ahead here and sort the wavetables. Let's reverse the entire order first. And let's go ahead here and sort by spectrum. So that did it right. That did it by the least amount to the highest amount. So we have a variety of options of things that we can do to the existing wavetables, but the real excitement comes here from when we start making our own wavetables. So I'm just going to go ahead and reinitialize the sound so that we're starting from a blank space here. And I'm going to go into this wavetable edit page, and I'm going to go to import. Now, this is where things get interesting with all of this as far as what the options are that we have, okay? So it's not just, you know, a one-to-one ratio that, hey, we import a sound and now we have a wavetable. No, there's different ways that this happens. Basically, what we're going to do is the first one that we're going to bring in is we're going to bring in audio via dynamic pitch 0 snap. And what I'm going to do is I have a couple of samples on the desktop, one of which is a sample from some movie from years ago. I don't know. It's been on my hard drive, but it's spoken word and text, so it should be interesting to use. And I'm going to go ahead here and import it. And now I have no idea what it's saying or what it was supposed to be saying. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back here, and we're going to use an envelope to control the wavetable position here, and we're going to put the long attack on it so that it takes a long time for it to reach where it's going. Let's turn that up even longer. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, you know, so that nobody is wondering anymore what exactly this sounds like, I'm going to go ahead and drop the audio sample directly into Ableton so that you can hear what it sounds like. Let me stop this.
Evolution has a way of keeping things alive.
Okay, so might not have been the best sample because there's some noise and different dirt and everything inside it. And I didn't trim it either. So maybe if I go ahead and trim it and do this. Let's go ahead here and crop the sample. Let's just listen to it one more time.
Evolution has a way of keeping things alive.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just cut it to the first word of evolution. And let's drag this back. And I'm going to say crop sample. And now what I'm going to do is just make sure that everything is where it needs to be. Now I'm going to drop it on the desktop. And
evolution has a...
Yep. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to Serum here. Sorry for the slight little mishap with that. But let's go back here, and I'm going to choose the new one that I dropped from Ableton. This is what I love so much about this drag and drop with Ableton, that I can just drop things directly onto the desktop from it and go back and forth. Okay, so now let's close the modulation on this, or just disable it for a quick second. So we're going to say bypass. And I need to go into the editor in order to control it with the mod wheel. Okay, so let's try a different import type. Let's try the dynamic pitch to follow. Okay, so basically what I'm trying to show you here is that if we slow it down, we can create a bit of an intelligent, it's almost like robot speak what we hear, but basically what it's doing is it's bringing the sample in the state that it's normally in. The really exciting thing here with what we can do with the import is this FFT resynthesis. And this basically is using sine waves to recreate all the harmonic spectra in each of the wavetables and in the analyzation. So basically we can choose different sizes of resolution that it's going to use. So we'll start with the 256 for this. And we'll go back and choose the same one again. And let's go ahead here and import it at 512. Okay, so this is the point at which it starts getting more into translating it into what we start to hear that would be appropriate for a synthesizer using this FFT resynthesis. I'm going to choose a higher thing. If you've used Alchemy inside Logic, Alchemy does the same type of import to samples as well, where it will basically resynthesize the whole thing based out of sine waves. And again, we can do a variety of different processes to all of this. Let's go ahead, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to normalize. I can normalize all of them the same way, or I can normalize each slice independently. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to normalize each one so that the gain is separate on each one. So now I have a bunch of healthy waveforms. And once I go back here, I can start performing a variety of different options onto these wavetables as well. I'm going to go ahead and use FM synthesis on this. I'm going to drop the sub-oscillator level. Let's actually, certain synthesizers have a way of leading you to one particular type of sound, so I'm going to cut that out of the mixture here right now. I'm going to go ahead and make this into a longer drone type of thing because I always get led to do these mid-range bass sounds with Serum. I don't know why. It just seems to want to do these types of things. Sorry, that is a very long decay on that sound. So one of the other things that we can do inside Serum at the oscillator level is that you've seen that I've done unison detune a couple of times on different examples. There's different types of detune that was done by different hardware synthesizers that came out over the years. The virtual analog synthesizers were the ones that basically became famous for this unison detune type of sound. They called it the super saw. And we can go ahead and set the type of spread that it's going to do, and super saw from the Roland JP8000 is actually built into Serum. And we can also do voice stack modes as well. So what I'm going to do with this sawtooth wave is that I'm going to have it do an octave above plus a seventh. I believe it's a flat seventh that it's going to do. It's actually, it's the root and the fifth. 7 is the exact number of semitones. So we can't forget about the pretty textural sounds that it's able to make as well. So the last thing that I want to show you here with this is that we looked at the second order modulation with note position to LFO, but we can also take envelopes and we can use the envelopes to modulate different aspects of the LFO if we wanted as well, and vice versa. So it's really very versatile. A lot of this becomes kind of a conceptual thing, and this definitely falls into the range of modularity with synthesis, where we kind of think a couple of steps through before what we're doing before we do it. And let's just go ahead, and we don't need to use extreme amounts with this, but it would be nice to have a little bit of change to the way that it morphs between the filter. I used one of the morphing filters inside here, and I'm a big fan of the morphing filters that Ableton has incorporated into their instruments and that Native Instruments put into Contact years ago. And I use them every chance I get for these types of textural sounds, and they're actually very, very nice and warm, as you hear inside Serum. Now, one of the other very, very cool things that we can do with Serum at the oscillator level is that we have panning control. And I'm going to go to LFO3 here. And with LFO3, what I'm going to do is I'm going to send it to control panning for oscillator 1. And I'm going to set a very slow rate here with this. So basically, we're going to have this higher pitched sound moving back and forth between the speakers. And obviously, most of these sounds will sound better with a smidge of reverb and delay on them. Let's set a ping pong, and let's use the Hall setting. Great. Oh, that's the reverb. I thought that that was one of the release times on the envelope. It's actually, sorry about that. Yep, that was it. So there's so many options and so many varieties as far as wavetable goes. It definitely is kind of a sign of the times as far as one of the major players in the synthesis world. It's because of the versatility and as far as what you can do with it. I don't think it takes the place of the really warm and rich sounds that we get with the analog synthesizer, but it makes for these very evocative digital type sounds that are just, and a lot of the music that we hear today is using more so, I'd say, there is a degree of warm sounds that are used, but I'd say it uses more digital, modern types of sounds, which is what I would describe wave. It's funny, I mean, they've always been describing wavetable as modern sounding, even back in the 80s. And I don't know, I guess it sounds modern for whatever time you're in, and sounds like maybe a couple of steps ahead of where we're at. So the last thing with Serum to be aware of is the fact that we have these modulation controls. And modulation controls basically, well, this is the mod wheel source here, but basically we are able to assign parameters to be controlled by top-level macros. So basically, if we wanted to have 4 parameters controlled by a single macro, we could. But the thing is that you may find yourself wondering, well, how do I do this? Where do I, you know, things can get a little bit daunting looking at everything on the screen. So I highly recommend that you become familiar with the matrix page here. And sometimes some of the mappings that I do with this, I just do directly from the matrix page itself, simply because I know directly exactly what I want to do. And although it's cute to be dragging things around all over the place, let's do a little bit more of that before we adjourn tonight. So let's go ahead here and set the detune amount from there. And let's go and take this one and control filter cutoff, but we're going to set it into negative polarity by doing that. And now basically we're controlling a bunch of different parameters at the same time. And I don't think there's a limit to how many macros, how many controls can be controlled from a single macro. Maybe it tells me 4. Let's. Now, I'm going to say that there's no limit to this as far as how many parameters a single macro can be controlling. But, again, everything is listed out here inside the matrix page, and it just keeps expanding. And, as far as programming, things in a modular context, which is kind of where we're getting to with all of this, as far as where this course is going to go to, we're already starting to see this, but basically, sometimes it can be much more helpful seeing a list out like this as far as what the source is and what the destination is. And sometimes some of the manufacturers get a little bit screwy as far as how they order it and the order that they put things in. Sometimes they may put the destination first and then have sources following, and then expression controls following that and different things. So it's just a matter of being able to decipher how they understood that someone would think normally about programming their synthesizer. So I'm really into sounds that I hear in movies and sci-fi kinds of things as well. So, I'm always listening for things in TV shows or in movies that kind of catch my ear. And I hear wavetable stuff all over the place, and I think that it's just one of the most malleable and programmable, and just it's so easy to get into. So, does anybody have any questions about what you've seen here tonight?
First of all, amazing presentation as always. And, it's always the art and the science is always so clear, but then also the art is amazing. And it's the choices that you make, and to have something be fresh and expressive and powerful. And it's fun just to see the combination of those two things. So there was a question about unison.
Yes.
Can you speak to unison just for the record, a little bit of like exactly what it does and how you use it?
Yeah, I'm just trying to view the chat right now so I can see where it was. Okay, so everybody sees
The question was, is unison acting as voices?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yes, it is. And this is basically why this is something that we see inside the digital realm, meaning where we started was with virtual analog synthesizers. And, it's not entirely true, because it did exist in a couple of the hardware synthesizers, but it was polyphonic synthesizers that it existed in that were analog. So the Roland Jupiter 8 was one of these. It had 8 voices. And when it's set to unison, basically it became monophonic. And all of those 8 voices that would otherwise be used to play chords or pads or additional notes would all be stacked into one single voice that would then be able to be detuned. The Prophet 5 was notorious for this as well. And this was one of these, things that kind of made it its sound. And everybody lusted after those two pieces of gear for a long time. In fact, a lot of the early drum and bass stuff was using that type of sound. They called it a Reese or a Hoover, and what it was a big unison detuned saw sound. And basically, these were sounds that were coming from the Prophet or from the Jupiter. And I when I got into this stuff, it was hardware, and I ended up buying myself a Roland MKS 80 Super Jupiter rack module because I wanted to have something that could do that type of sound. Because the software synthesizers really were not anywhere. The ones that were around were nothing near what they are today. And, it just was, so if you could get a recording of that or a sample of it, you could, use it to do different things. But basically the digital world allows for a lot of manipulation. The unison was one of these things that we see very, very commonplace in today's instruments and today's synthesizers, simply because DSP power has gotten so much better and computers have gotten so much faster. But years ago, when this thing, when this started with the virtual instrument emulations, 2004 is when they started with the component modeling of synthesizers and started, they started really sounding like the hardware counterparts, or sounding convincing enough to be used as hardware. The unison was incredibly taxing on the CPU. And one of the things that you'll notice with Serum is that it actually has a voice count here of how many voices it's using, meaning each time you strike a key, let's say you have 16 voice unison set for one of the oscillators. If you don't have it set to mono, it's going to be able to do polyphonic based on the number of voices that you've allocated for the whole thing. So I allocate 32 voices of polyphony, which would allow for 576 different independent voices inside the whole thing. So there's a ton of math going on inside these things that basically is like they never would have been able to do this kind of stuff in hardware. But basically the unison is in fact doubling the voices. And if we click on the detune button here, basically the detune button is going to allow us to control how much is detuned simultaneously, while how much each of the voices are spread in a panoramic position from the center voice. So unison is a very fast way to do synth strings and synth leads and these types of things, but it can be very interesting when you use it. And I did the 16 voice here with this particular one because I wanted to, simulate like a synth string kind of section going against this wavetable with the brightness, but it doesn't necessarily need to be, 16 voices all the time. A lot of times less is more with this stuff. And for this, for this particular center sound, which I'm calling it, which is the digital one that I took from the sample, 3 voices would probably be fine for doing this type of thing, just so that there's a little bit of width and a slight little detuning to each of those separate voices. So the subtleties, they say the devil is in the details, and it's the subtleties with all of this. It's not about extreme settings. It's, finding the sweet spot with where things just sound, it should sound magical to your ears. I've spent so much time with this stuff over the years that, when I sit down to program sounds and I sit down to write music, I want to make sounds that I feel like I've not heard before, or things that are just, inspiring to me, that are like, that's interesting. Yeah, I've known that parameter is there, and I've known that I could do that particular thing with it for years, but in this context and trying it like this is actually really fresh, and this is inspiring. And this is kind of the way that I approach this with these sounds. I kind of think things through a couple of steps, like, I want to make a pad sound. Maybe I want it to be layered, where I want some sparkly thing going on top of it that's panning left and right. I want to, have parts of it swell in, parts of it swell out. I want to use, something that sounds like the tonality is changing, evolving over time, but in a repeating manner, and just kind of start with that, and then start playing around with the small details with it to fine tune everything and just hone in on that magical little place that I'd like to find someday.
I think we found some magical places tonight. And especially, these sounds come together at the end, and some of the macro stuff too is like so expressive and a little unpredictable, but in a fantastic way.
Yeah, and I think the thing to remember too with all of this is I save every single thing that I do with every single sound that I make. And what I do is that there's sometimes that I don't, there's sometimes where I sit down sessions not necessarily to write, music, but to write sounds and put together ideas as far as things for a collection of new bass sounds or a bass and a lead sound. One of the very cool things with this is that a lot of these tracks have, kind of a back and forth between different sounds where it's almost like what I call a call and answer type of thing. Using programs like Ableton or Bitwig or Logic, we're able to make rack devices or splits where we can have one sound on one side of the keyboard and another one on the other side of the keyboard. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll sit down and design sounds that are going to match with each other to work for a particular track, even though if I'm not sitting down to work for the track. You know, so it's kind of like I try not to, I try to have something to show for every single time I turn the computer on and I open this up. So I would say save everything. I'm still revisiting sounds that I did 10 years ago that I have on the computer and different synthesizers from all over the place. And, and then it's like, oh, I was so close to that one being the sound that I wanted to. I just didn't turn this little thing exactly where it was supposed to be. And I didn't modulate this by that particular parameter. And, so it's a constant learning process, and you should always be surprised by new things that you find when you sit down with it. And at the point at which it starts to get boring and you feel like you've heard everything, you might either need to look deeper or step away from that one tool that you're using, and try something completely fresh. But
And like you said, save like a lunatic.
yeah, save like a
Because
lunatic.
if one little change and all of a sudden something just disappears. And I say the same thing when it comes to sound toys, when you're playing with sound toys. Like, if you like it, save as, because then you can always go back and you enter these magical places, that sometimes they're much easier just to recall than they are to recreate.
And one of the organization things that I will tell you with Ableton Live, which is kind of a godsend with this, is this library and really making a hierarchy for yourself as far as how to store sound. So this is this pad sound that I just did here. I'm just going to drop it into my Serum pad sounds folder, and it just stores with all the rest of them. I generally keep all of my plugins inside Live as rack devices, and the simple reason is because it's actually lays over from the early days of Live 9 and Push, and the fact that you couldn't browse through plugins. So basically, you would keep things in racks. But a lot of times, what I'm doing with these sounds is that if they're already in the racks, I already am going to assign some top level controls to the macros, and I'm also going to have it primed and ready to do an instrument rack split where I simply just go ahead, duplicate a chain, and put a pitch shifter on it to make it an octave higher. Let's go to pitch, and let's drop it just onto this particular chain right here. And now you might get to watch my computer cry. I don't think so. Well, all right. So, yeah, it's little things like this, like again, and it's kind of like looking at, we were talking about this at a smaller kind of concept with this when we were talking about shifting oscillators and different pitches and everything to create the sound that fills more of the frequency spectrum. I do this with full sounds as well. This whole fleshed out sound here, it was so easy to just duplicate it and then just throw the entire thing an octave higher, and then I maybe mix the levels, put an EQ on one particular part, and just really shape it. So good foundational starting point that lets me go different places.
We are coming up on the hour, so if you could let us know what next Sunday sound design. It just sounds good. It rolls off the tongue. What's on the menu for next Sunday?
Sunday sound design will be FM synthesis, and we will be looking at a variety of different approaches to it. FM synthesis is actually the one that I hated the most when I started learning all of this stuff, and the reason was because it was all in hardware, and it was all working off of a 1980s 2-character LED display that just showed numbers, and you had to look at this secret decoder sheet in order to figure out which parameter you were adjusting and what value you were setting it to. And FM synthesis doesn't work anything like subtractive synthesis or wavetable synthesis works. It's kind of the backwards way of the way that it works. It starts with less and adds more, where subtractive synthesis starts with more and adds less. Wavetable synthesis starts with more and adds less, meaning that you're using filters at the end. There are no filters in FM. But I have found a new love for FM synthesis since everything went digital into the software world, because all of the bad things that made it so unfun to use have now been eliminated from it and have made it very, very easy to shape sounds. And again, it's another paint on the palette that is going to allow you to make completely different sounds from what you're able to do inside wavetable and subtractive or analog emulations. So we're going to be looking at it over 2 weeks, and we're going to be looking at operator, and we're going to be looking at FM8, and we're going to be looking at FM applications in some of the other synthesizers as well, some that we may have seen already, some that we may not have seen. But basically, FM is used in so many different places that once we really understand what it's doing and how to get a good starting point with it, and then be able to spin off it into a place, because it's the most unpredictable out of all of them. And even after designing sounds with it for years, I still can only tell you a little bit as far as where it's going to go when you make certain settings.
Sounds amazing. All right, Dr. Petti, thank you so much. Great to see everybody. Thank you guys for coming out, and we'll see you next Sunday night for Sunday Night Sound Design.
Have a great week, everyone.
Have a good week. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.